In the summer of 1876, along a river in Montana Territory, more than 200 U.S. cavalrymen rode into a valley, and none rode back out. The Army called it a massacre. The Lakota and Cheyenne called it a victory. 22 years later, a Northern Cheyenne chief named Two Moon, who had fought that day, finally told his version of events, one of the most important Native American testimonies of the 19th century. What he described wasn't the glorious last stand America preferred to remember. It was chaotic, brutal, and deeply human. This wasn't merely a battle. It was a collision between an expanding nation determined to herd every remaining tribe onto reservations, and the largest assembly of Plains warriors anyone alive could recall, fighting for their families and their way of life. What happened on the Little Bighorn shocked the country, ended careers, and became the most argued over military clash in American history. Yet for generations, one side's account was nearly erased. By 1876, Washington was finishing its push to confine the last free tribes to reservations. Gold discovered in the Black Hills land promised to the Lakota by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty had drawn a flood of prospectors. Rather than enforce the treaty, the government ordered all Lakota and Cheyenne bands to report to their agencies by January 31, 1876, or be branded hostile. Many bands camped along the Yellowstone never got the message, or simply refused. 3 Army columns were dispatched in a coordinated pincer meant to force surrender without a major fight. Instead, it produced one of the worst defeats in U.S. military history. Two Moon 34 that summer was a minor chief in the Cheyenne Kit Fox Warrior Society. Fighting since age 13, he'd even briefly scouted for the government, giving him a rare view into both worlds. His account, recorded around 1898 by writer Hamlin Garland and published in McClure's magazine, remains strikingly plain-spoken, the testimony of someone describing what he actually witnessed, not what he hoped people would believe. George Armstrong Custer, 36, commanded the 7th Cavalry. His Civil War fame rested on reckless cavalry charges that somehow paid off, and he expected the same boldness to work again as it had at the Washita in 1868. This time he was catastrophically mistaken. He had no idea what awaited him. By late June, Lakota bands Hunkpapa, Oglala, Miniconjou, Sans Arc, Blackfeet, Two Kettle, Brule, along with Northern Cheyenne and some Arapaho, had gathered in what may have been the largest Plains Indian encampment in living memory. Roughly 3 miles long, 6,000 to 8,000 people, including 1,500 to 2,500 warriors. Among the leaders were Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall, names that would echo for a century. Custer's roughly 600 men carried single-shot Springfield carbines prone to jamming, no Gatling guns, no artillery. Many warriors, by contrast, wielded repeating Winchesters and Henrys, giving them a serious firepower edge. 8 days earlier, the same warriors had fought General Crook to a standstill at the Rosebud, battle-tested fighters, not a disorganized crowd, and Custer had no idea that Column was now out of the campaign entirely. At dawn on June 25th, Custer's scouts spotted an enormous pony herd and a sprawling camp from a lookout called the Crow's Nest. Warned there were more warriors than the regiment had bullets, Custer dismissed the caution. His real fear was that the village would scatter before he could strike. Rather than wait for reinforcements or scout further, he split his roughly 600 men into 3 battalions, with no way to communicate or support each other. Benteen swept southwest, Reno would charge the village's southern end, and Custer himself would swing north along the bluffs. On paper it was daring. In practice, it doomed them. Around 3 p.m., Reno's charge briefly succeeded before hundreds of warriors poured out of the village. Gall, having just lost 2 wives and 3 children to the opening volleys, led a furious counterattack. Reno's line broke, and his survivors fled in chaos to the bluffs, losing roughly 40 dead. Word spread instantly. More soldiers to the north. Two Moon turned his horse and rode with hundreds of others, Cheyenne and Lakota together, flowing through hidden ravines toward Custer's column. When the soldiers dismounted on the ridge, every warrior watching understood what it meant. The cavalry knew they were in trouble. What followed wasn't a heroic stand, it was a methodical envelopment. Crazy Horse swept around to seal the north. Rosebud veterans pressed from the south. Two Moon Cheyenne pushed from the west. Custer's command fragmented into shrinking, isolated clusters. Their single-shot carbines, firing roughly 1 round every 8 seconds and prone to jamming in the heat, were no match for repeating rifles capable of 15 rounds a minute. Two Moon described warriors reloading and passing spare guns back and forth in practiced rhythm, while soldiers stumbled, fired their last cartridges, and simply stopped fighting, not in surrender, but in collapse. Within roughly an hour, every one of Custer's 210 men was dead. Afterward, the warriors stripped the dead of weapons and supplies, not desecration, but survival. Once stripped, Two Moon noted, no one could tell officers from privates, rank, and fame meant nothing against the leveling fact of death. Custer himself lay indistinguishable from the youngest soldier beside him. Then came 2 Moon's most quoted, most haunting line. The bodies were left where they fell, and that night there was no victory dance, only sorrow. For Plains warriors, dance was the customary celebration of bravery. Its absence speaks volumes. These men had defended their families, yet the scale of killing left them subdued. The fallen soldiers, too, had been someone's sons. The next morning, chiefs walked the field counting the dead with tally sticks. 2 Moon's count came to roughly 388 soldiers killed, though modern historians put U.S. losses nearer 268, with native losses between 30 and 100. The discrepancy doesn't undercut the account. It reflects the chaos of battle and decades passing before the words were ever written down. News reached the country on July 4, 1876, America's centennial, making the disaster all the more shocking. Within months, the legend of Custer's last stand was being painted into existence. Golden-haired, saber-raised, heroically fighting to the end. It bore little resemblance to reality. For decades, native testimonies were dismissed, while Custer became a martyr. Not until the 1980s, after a grass fire exposed the battlefield, did archaeologists map scattered cartridge casings, revealing fragmented, isolated firing positions. Soldiers fighting alone, not in a tidy defensive ring. The evidence matched 2 Moon's account far better than it matched the paintings. 2 Moon lived until 1917, watching the world he'd fought for vanish into reservation life. Yet his words endured, carried by a single magazine article. "We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful." That sentence reveals more about Little Bighorn than any heroic canvas ever could. Proof that victory and grief can occupy the same breath, and that history sounds very different once every voice is finally heard.